The air in Flathead Valley carried that sharpness only early autumn brings, the kind that slides into your lungs like cold steel, reminding you winter was waiting just beyond the hills. The pines whispered above the cracked asphalt, and the gravel under Ethan Cole's boots shifted with a sound that made him flinch just slightly, like distant static from another life. The Mountain Haven Wildlife Center sat at the edge of town, a plain timber building with a faded green roof and a hand-painted sign someone once cared about. The letters peeled, but the words still mattered. Rescue. Rehabilitate. Release. Ethan stopped a few steps from the door. His breath ghosted in the chill. He adjusted the strap of the worn backpack that carried almost nothing, an old thermos, a notebook, a folded photo of faces no longer here. He had been in harder places, dusty roads overseas, nights filled with alarms instead of crickets, but this was somehow worse. Quiet always was. His VA counselor, Dr. Rowe, had suggested it weeks ago. You don't have to talk, Ethan. Just visit. Sometimes connection starts small. He hadn't said no. He'd just never gone until today. Maybe it was the silence in his cabin. Maybe it was the way the coffee pot never seemed to empty because he never poured a second cup. Whatever the reason, he stood now before a building that smelled faintly of hay and antiseptic. And he hesitated. Through the glass door he saw movement, a woman in a gray flannel jacket laughing as she brushed off her gloves. Her hair was tied back loose strands, catching light from a skylight above the kennels. The sound of her voice hit him oddly, a tone that didn't ask for anything. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the mix of pine bedding bleach and the unmistakable musk of animals that belonged to the forest but were trapped between worlds. Mara Bennett, the volunteer, turned when she heard the door. You're new, she said, not asking but observing. Name's Mara. Ethan nodded once. Just looking. That's fine, she said softly. Most people who say that end up staying longer than they planned. He didn't answer. His voice came rarely these days, measured like rations. The corridor stretched ahead, a narrow hallway with wooden pens on either side. The air vibrated faintly with sounds, the rattle of a chain. The deep huff of breath from behind a heavy gate, the quiet rhythm of something alive trying to remember trust. He walked slowly, the soles of his boots sticking slightly to the damp concrete. A sign above read, Forest Species Rehab, do not tap glass. A small black bear cub, barely larger than a retriever, lifted its head, blinked, and let out a curious grunt. Its paws still wrapped in gauze. A fox paced in the next pen, red fur dulled by dust. Ethan stopped here and there, his expression unreadable, not pity, not fascination, just an odd recognition. He'd seen this look before in field hospitals, soldiers staring at walls that couldn't answer back. We get rescues from all over Montana, Mara said, walking beside him. Car collisions, wildfire burns, orphaned cubs. The forest gives and takes. She smiled faintly. You from around here? Up by Echo Ridge, he murmured. Moved back after service. Quiet up there, she said. Guess that's the point. He nodded once, eyes still scanning. Behind one pen, a bald eagle flapped unevenly, its wing feathers trimmed for recovery. The sound echoed metallic and wild. Ethan's gaze lingered. How long do they stay? Until they're ready, Mara said. Some make it back, some don't. He looked at the eagle again, its one good wing flexing as if it remembered sky. Yeah, he said quietly. Not everyone gets to go back. She glanced at him but said nothing. The hallway turned. The light changed here, dimmer, filtered through wire mesh. In the far corner stood a reinforced enclosure, heavier steel double locks. A sign read, Adult Grizzly, under medical observation. Inside, nothing moved at first, just shadows. That's Kodiak Mara, said voice lowering out of habit. He's been here 3 years. Ethan took a few steps closer. The scent of earth and pine intensified, mixed with the animal's musk. Not unpleasant, just raw. Then the shape in the corner shifted, a massive shoulder, the faint glint of amber eyes. The bear exhaled through his nose, slow and deep, like a sigh from somewhere ancient. Why's he here? Ethan asked. Injury. Snare wound on his hind leg. Rehabbed, but can't be released too comfortable with humans. Probably wouldn't survive. Mara paused. He came in as a cub. His mother was shot by poachers outside Glacier. Game wardens found him half-starved. Ethan didn't look away. The bear's fur, thick and dark, caught the light like smoke. One ear was torn. The mark healed, but unmistakable. He shifted again, testing his weight. Does he ever... Ethan hesitated. Act up, no. Not anymore. He just stays. Watches. Eats when he feels like it. She glanced at the clipboard on the gate. Sometimes he reacts to thunder, though. They think it reminds him of the chopper that brought him in. Ethan's hands slid deeper into his jacket pockets. He didn't say it out loud, but he understood that sound, how thunder could sound like something else. For a while, he just stood there. The bear's eyes followed him, slow and deliberate. Two survivors are taking inventory of each other. A long breath passed before Ethan stepped back. He looks calm, he said finally. He's not? Mara replied. He's just learned that calm keeps people away. She said it like someone who'd seen both kinds of cages, steel and invisible. Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. He spent another few minutes walking the corridor, but the image of the bear lingered. When he reached the door, he looked back once more. The grizzly was still watching him. That quiet, heavy gaze carried no threat, just recognition. Outside, the light had shifted. Clouds rolled in from the ridge, brushing the valley in silver. A crow landed on the fence post, tilted its head and called once before taking off again. Ethan breathed in the cold air, the kind that smelled faintly of wet leaves and coming snow. He thought of the bear in that dim pen of its stillness, the way it didn't beg or bark or move, just existed like he did. The drive back to Echo Ridge wound through pines that whispered secrets in the wind. His truck rattled over the dirt road, the heater whining against the chill. He passed the same frozen creek he always did, the one where he used to fish with his brother before deployments. The reflection of the trees rippled on the surface, fractured, shifting, and for a second he saw his own face among them, older, quieter still, searching. He parked outside the cabin, engine ticking in the silence. The air smelled of damp cedar. He sat there a while, hands resting on the steering wheel. That bear's eyes wouldn't leave his mind. They weren't pleading like the dogs he'd seen at other shelters. They were steady, patient, as if saying, I know the waiting too. He poured coffee into the old tin mug he always used. The first sip tasted like nothing as usual. He opened his notebook and stared at the blank page, then at the photo tucked inside a medic team, standing beside a helicopter, the sky behind them burnt orange. A note written on the back in another hand, We'll come back whole. He had never crossed it out, though he'd wanted to. He looked again at the blank page. For the first time in a long while, his hand moved. He wrote a single line, went to the shelter today, saw something that reminded me. He didn't know what he meant exactly, only that it felt true. The next morning, fog blanketed the valley. Ethan stood on the porch thermos, steaming in his hand. Down in the distance, he could just make out the faint green roof of Mountain Haven through the mist. Something in his chest pulled, not heavy this time, just curious. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the start of something small, the kind his counselor meant. Connection, not loud, not forced, just two living things, remembering how to breathe near each other. He glanced toward the forest edge where a single pine cone dropped with a soft thud onto the damp earth. The sound reminded him of the bear's slow breath against the metal bars. He finished his coffee, grabbed his jacket, and started down the path toward town. Behind him, the cabin stayed quiet. But inside on the table, the notebook lay open, a page turned, waiting. Sometimes healing begins not with a plan, but with a door you almost didn't open. And for Ethan, that door would lead him not just to a grizzly in a cage, but to the kind of bond no war, no silence, and no fear could ever erase. The second time Ethan walked into the shelter, the air felt different. Lighter maybe, or maybe he'd just stopped holding his breath so tightly. He nodded to Mara as he came through the door. Back again, she asked, smiling from behind a crate of feed. Guess so. he said. "Didn't see everything last time." "You saw plenty," she teased, brushing sawdust off her gloves. "But if you're looking for company, the grizzly's still there. He doesn't get many visitors?" Ethan didn't answer, but his eyes flicked down the hallway. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere a raccoon chittered in its pen. He walked past the smaller enclosures, past the smell of straw and disinfectant, until the light began to dim again near the back. The same heavy gait, the same quiet that wasn't quite silence. Kodiak lay curled near the far wall. His coat had a dull sheen the color of river mud and autumn bark. His breath rose and fell in a steady rhythm, chest expanding with the weight of something ancient. Ethan crouched down near the gate, elbows resting on his knees. The bear's ear twitched once, but he didn't lift his head. "You remember me?" Ethan asked softly. His voice sounded odd in the stillness. The bear exhaled through his nose, a low rumble that vibrated the air between them. Ethan didn't move. He knew that sound. It wasn't anger. It was an acknowledgement, the kind you make when words aren't part of the language. Mara appeared beside him holding a clipboard. "He's calmer with you here," she said, keeping her voice low. "Normally, he gets agitated when someone lingers." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe he knows I'm not a tourist." She smiled faintly. "He's good at reading people. Always has been." She leaned against the wall. "You want to hear something strange?" she asked. "A ranger from Glacier sent us footage from when they first found him. He was maybe 4 months old, wandering near the burned edge of a campsite. They said he kept coming back to the same patch of ground for 3 days. Wouldn't leave." Ethan looked up. "Why?" "That's where his mother was shot." He didn't understand she wasn't coming back. Neither spoke for a while. Ethan stared at the bear. Kodiak shifted again, his paw sliding against the straw. The scar on his hind leg caught the light white against the dark fur, a clean line where the snare had cut deep years ago. Ethan's mind drifted. A flash, a smell, a sound. His hands pressed against fabric soaked with blood. The helicopter above rotor wash slamming dust into his face. A voice shouting for a medic, and then nothing. Just silence where his friend's voice used to be. When the memory faded, he realized he'd been gripping the metal rail between them. Kodiak was watching him now, head raised, eyes steady. Something about the look pulled him back into the present. Two creatures measuring damage the same way, not by the wound itself, but by how long they'd carried it. Mara broke the quiet. "You know what's funny? Most people assume bears like him are dangerous, but they're not. They're careful, cautious. They avoid fights unless they have to." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's not dangerous. That's smart." "Exactly," she said. "But people don't see the difference. They just see size, scars, teeth, and decide what story fits best." He nodded slowly. "Same thing happens with soldiers." Her eyes softened. "Yeah," she said. "Guess it does." She checked the clipboard, then crouched beside him. "We call him Kody. He responds to it sometimes. Or at least he used to." Ethan tilted his head. "You think he remembers who hurt him? I think he remembers everything. Animals don't forget pain, but they can choose not to live inside it forever." That line stayed with him. When she left to tend to the cubs, Ethan remained, his breath visible in the cool air. Kody shifted again, lifting his head fully this time. The bear's eyes were lighter up close, almost amber ringed with gray. He blinked slowly once, twice. Ethan leaned forward slightly and whispered, "You and me both, buddy." Kody let out a soft, guttural sound, somewhere between a sigh and a growl. Then he rested his head back on his paws. Ethan stayed until the lights flickered, signaling closing time. As he turned to go, Mara called from down the hall. "He moved for you, you know. He doesn't do that for anyone else." He didn't know how to respond. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. He paused before starting his truck, glancing back through the glass. Kody was still visible in the corner, a silhouette against the dim yellow light. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The sound of the helicopter still echoed in his ears, mixing now with the image of the bear pacing the fence. He rose before dawn, pulled on his boots, and drove back. Mara was surprised to see him. "We don't open till 8. "I know," he said. "Just figured I could help, cleaning pens or something." She handed him a rake without argument. "If you don't mind the smell, we'll take the help." Hours passed quietly. The scrape of the rake on concrete, the clatter of feed buckets, the steady breath of life returning. Every so often, Ethan glanced toward Kody's enclosure. The bear watched him with a lazy, half-interest eyes following his movements, but never tense. During lunch, Mara joined him near the back steps with 2 paper cups of coffee. Steam rose between them. "You ever worked with animals before?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Only humans pretending to be." She laughed. "That counts." He took a sip, then looked toward the tree line. "You ever think they know more than we give them credit for?" Mara shrugged. "About us? Probably. They don't lie to themselves the way we do." The thought settled deep. Maybe that's what drew him back, creatures that didn't hide their scars or explain them away. They just lived around them like rivers bending around stones. Over the next few weeks, Ethan returned again and again. He started learning routines, feeding times, cleaning methods, the way Kody preferred his space respected until he made the first move. Some days he'd talk softly through the bars, recounting stories no one else had heard in years. Sometimes he just sat. Kody began responding subtle gestures, at first a slow blink, a shift closer to the fence when Ethan spoke. He'd grunt softly when Ethan arrived, not aggressive, just aware. One afternoon, a group of school kids visited for a tour. Their chatter filled the hallway like bright wind. When they reached Kody's enclosure, one boy pressed his face to the glass and shouted, "He's huge!" The bear flinched at the sudden noise, muscles tensing. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. "Hey, easy," he said to the group. "You don't need to shout. He can hear you just fine." The boy blinked, embarrassed. Ethan crouched to his level. "He's not scary, just old, tired. We all act tough when we're scared, right?" The boy nodded. Same for him. Kody had relaxed again, huffing softly. One girl whispered, "Does he like you?" Ethan smiled. "I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't mind me being here." That was the first time he noticed it, the odd warmth spreading through his chest. Not pride, not comfort, just something lighter than before. Later, as the group left, Mara walked up beside him. "You handled that well," she said. "Most people freeze up when he moves." He shrugged. He wasn't mad. He was scared. Mara studied him for a moment. "You get him, don't you?" "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe I just recognized the look of someone who's been waiting too long to be useful again." For the first time, her smile faded into something gentler. "That's not nothing, Ethan." He looked back toward the enclosure. Kody was sitting now, head slightly tilted, the torn ear catching sunlight. For a moment, it almost looked like a salute. There was a kind of understanding between them now. No promises, no quick fixes, just presence. And maybe that was the quiet lesson hiding here, that connection doesn't arrive with words or grand gestures. Sometimes it's built from repetition, from simply showing up enough times that fear gets tired and trust steps in. That evening, Mara locked up the center. Ethan lingered near his truck, watching the mountains fade into shadow. "Storm coming," Mara said, nodding at the dark horizon. "He doesn't like thunder," Ethan murmured. "Neither do you," she said softly, more statement than question. He looked at her surprised, then half smiled. "Guess we'll see who handles it better." The first drops began to fall as he pulled away from the parking lot, headlights cutting through the mist. Behind him, inside the shelter, Kody stirred at the sound of distant thunder, a deep, uneasy rumble echoing from his chest. And miles away, Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel, pulse quickening at the same sound. Neither of them knew it yet, but the storm that would come next wouldn't just shake the sky, it would test everything fragile they'd begun to rebuild. And when that storm hit, both man and grizzly would find themselves standing face to face with ghosts they thought were buried forever. The storm came and went, but it left its echo behind. The roads in Flathead Valley shimmered with rain the next morning, and the air held that clean scent that only follows thunder-damp earth and pine. Ethan pulled into the gravel lot of Mountain Haven Wildlife Center, his truck wheels crunching through puddles. He'd barely slept. Every time lightning had cracked, he'd seen flashes of another storm, another country, another night that ended with a name shouted into the dark. Mara was already outside when he arrived, rolling a feed barrel toward the barn. "You didn't have to come this early," she said. "Didn't feel like staying home," he answered, taking the other end of the barrel. She smiled knowingly. "Guess we both don't sleep much." The bare enclosures sat quietly, steam rising off the damp roofs. When they reached Kodiak's gate, Ethan stopped. The grizzly was pacing slower than before, but restless. Mud streaked his fur where he'd rubbed against the fence during the thunder. "He hates storms," Mara said softly. "Reminds him of that first flight from the capture site. Rotor blades sound too much like thunder." Ethan nodded. He understood the association too well. Guess fear doesn't care about species. Mara gave him a sideways look. "You want to help settle him?" He hesitated. "What can I do?" "Just be here," she said simply. "He knows your voice." So Ethan stayed. He leaned against the post, arms crossed, speaking in the low tone used on patrols, steady even meant to calm rather than command. "Easy, big guy. Storm's gone. Just us now." Kody paused, nostrils flaring. His breath came out in a puff of vapor. For a second, his pacing stopped. He watched Ethan's head tilted slightly. The moment stretched, then the bear turned, lay down, and rested his chin on his paws. Mara exhaled quietly. That's the first time he's done that in a storm's aftermath. Ethan looked at her. "What does it mean?" "It means he trusts you enough not to hide." Trust, that word sat heavily on Ethan's chest. It had been a long time since he'd earned it from anyone. The rest of the morning unfolded in small tasks, fixing loose boards, refilling water troughs, hauling feed. The rhythm of physical work dulled the edges of thought. A few volunteers trickled in, college kids from the wildlife program, laughing easily, moving with the lightness of people untouched by ghosts. Ethan didn't join their chatter. He didn't need to. By noon, he found himself sitting near Kody's enclosure again, sharing half his sandwich through the bars, bread torn in chunks, tossed just close enough. Kody sniffed, then ate crumbs clinging to his fur. The simplicity of it, man and bear, no expectation, felt almost sacred. Later, an older man approached carrying a toolbox and wearing a veteran's cap faded from the sun. "You're the new guy helping out?" he asked, extending a calloused hand. "Name's Tom Reyes. I fix things when they break, which is most days." Ethan shook his hand. "Ethan, appreciate the help." Tom eyed him with that silent recognition one soldier gives another. "You with the Army, medic," Ethan said. "Marines," Tom replied. "Different branch, same ghosts." They shared a chuckle. Then Tom gestured toward Kody. "Big fella's something, ain't he? Reminds me of the boys back in my unit. Rough exterior, but most of it's scar tissue, not anger." Ethan smiled slightly. "You come by often every week. Mara roped me in after I retired. Fixing cages beats sitting at home counting pills." Tom's tone was casual, but Ethan caught the truth behind it. The center wasn't just for animals. It was for people trying to remember how to live without the fight. That afternoon, the rain started again, lighter, this time more like a whisper. Ethan and Tom repaired the outer fencing near the tree line. Between hammer strikes, Tom spoke quietly. "You ever think about joining the veteran outreach group down in Kalispell?" Ethan shook his head. "Talking doesn't help much." Tom smiled knowingly. "Yeah, I said the same thing. Then I realized sometimes you don't go to talk, you go so someone else doesn't feel alone." The line stayed with Ethan. When they finished, he walked back to the main pen. Kody was awake watching. The bear's massive shoulders rose and fell like slow waves. Ethan crouched again near the gate. "Guess we're both still learning how to stay," he murmured. Kody snorted softly, shifting his weight, then lowered his head close enough that Ethan could see his reflection in those amber eyes. For a split second, he thought about how strange healing looked, not clean, not quick. Just two beings standing near their pain without turning away. Days turned into weeks. The awkward silence between them became something steady. Ethan started volunteering, officially paperwork, training, the usual rules. He learned the feeding routine, the signals the bears gave before shifting moods, and how to move slowly enough that nothing startled. Mara watched his progress quietly. One morning, she handed him a clipboard. "Want to try helping with behavioral enrichment? It's just a fancy way of saying, keep them from getting bored." Ethan read the list: hidden food puzzles, scent trails, and new logs to climb. "Sounds simple enough." "It's not," she said. "They're smart. They remember patterns. You have to surprise them, keep their minds working." He smiled faintly. "Guess that's not so different from people." They built enrichment toys together out of tires and rope. Kody's curiosity returned slowly, pawing, nosing, flipping the tires over. Every time he solved one, Ethan felt a small, inexplicable swell of pride. Progress wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, rhythmic, but it was real. One afternoon, Mara caught Ethan watching Kody's limp. "You worry about him," she said. "Just wondering if it still hurts," he replied. "Maybe sometimes," she said, "but he doesn't show it unless he has to." Wild animals don't waste energy on pity. Not for others. Not for themselves. Ethan thought about that for a long moment. Wish people were better at that. "People are complicated," Mara said gently. "We carry what we think we deserve. He carries what he survived. There's a difference." That night, Ethan stayed late helping Tom replace wiring in the barn. When the others left, he walked back to Kody's gate one more time. The bear was lying in the straw, breathing slowly. Ethan spoke softly, not expecting a response. "You know, I used to think I was done. Like there wasn't anything left worth fixing." The bear's eyes opened, catching a glint of moonlight. Ethan continued. "But maybe broken doesn't mean useless. Maybe it just means you've been tested more than most." He chuckled softly. "Guess you and I are proof of that." The sound that came from Kody was low, almost a hum. It vibrated the ground. It wasn't a growl. It was something closer to agreement. Ethan stayed there until the lights clicked off, one by one. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive. As weeks passed, Mara noticed changes in both of them. Ethan spoke more, laughed occasionally, and even joined Tom for coffee after shifts. And Kody, once motionless for hours, began greeting the morning with low chuffs, standing to watch the volunteers arrive. Healing isn't a straight path. It's a rhythm. Show up. Stay calm. Repeat. Sometimes the smallest consistency rewires what pain once controlled. Then, one afternoon, the fragile balance shifted. A thunderclap rolled across the valley without warning, sharp and sudden. Kody jerked upright, claws raking straw. The volunteers froze. Ethan was closest. "It's okay," he said firmly, stepping forward. "Easy, Kody. It's just noise." The bear's breathing quickened, eyes wild for a moment. Ethan moved more slowly, keeping his posture low. "Remember, it's over. We're still here." His tone wasn't commanding, it was memory. Something softened. Kody's ears lowered, his breathing steadied, the tension drained like air from a tire. Mara exhaled. "How did you do that?" Ethan shrugged. "Same way we used to calm soldiers in the field. Talk low. Stay still. Let them borrow your calm till they find their own." That night, Mara told him something that would change how he saw the work. "You know," she said, "wildlife rescue isn't just about the animals. It's about what we learn watching them heal without asking why they had to get hurt first." Ethan turned that over in his mind. Maybe that was the quiet truth behind all of this. The bears, the volunteers, the veterans, they weren't saving anyone. They were just giving each other reasons to keep showing up. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Mist rose off the valley floor, curling like breath over the pines. Kody lumbered to the edge of the pen when Ethan arrived, rumbling softly. Ethan smiled. "Morning, partner." For the first time, the word felt natural. He leaned on the fence, coffee in hand, and watched the light catch the bear's fur. The storm had passed for now, but both of them knew more would come. Still, for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise that when the next storm hit, neither would face it alone. And soon enough, that promise would be tested not by thunder this time, but by the wild itself, when rescue would no longer be a job, but a matter of survival. The storm came fast that night. No warning, no time to prepare. The sky over Flathead Valley turned the color of slate, and the first crack of thunder rolled like an old memory through the mountains. Ethan had just finished locking up the Mountain Haven Wildlife Center when the wind picked up scattering feed buckets across the yard. The smell of rain and pine filled the air, sharp and electric. Mara shouted from the doorway, "We've got to secure the medical barn. If lightning hits near the enclosure again, Kody will panic." Ethan nodded, pulling his hood tight as rain began to hammer down. He ran toward the far building, boots splashing through puddles. The air vibrated with that low, constant growl only a heavy storm carries. Inside the barn, the light flickered. Kody was pacing, his massive body shadowed under the single bulb that swung from the ceiling. His fur was damp where rain had drifted through the vent slats. Each thunderclap sent a ripple through his ears, flat breath, harsh. Ethan stepped closer, voice calm. "Easy, big guy. You're okay. It's just noise." But it wasn't just noise. Not for either of them. A flash of lightning hit so close that it rattled the windows. Kody lunged not at Ethan but toward the sound, pure instinct. His claws scraped metal, the clang echoing like gunfire. Ethan flinched. The noise triggered a muscle memory too deep to resist. In an instant, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Kandahar. The air was hot and dusty. Mortars screamed from a distance. Someone shouted, "Medic! We've got one down." His boots pounded the sand, his heart a drumbeat in his throat. Then the explosion, white light, silence, then ringing. The world tipped sideways. When the dust cleared, his friend Sloane was lying 10 feet away, eyes open but seeing nothing. Ethan dropped to his knees, hands pressing the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. "Stay with me," he whispered over and over. But Sloane didn't. Another thunderclap ripped through the barn, snapping Ethan back. He was breathing hard, chest-tight palms trembling. Across from him, Kody had frozen, sensing the shift. The bear's eyes locked on Ethan, not fearful, not aggressive, just aware. Two creatures caught in the same storm, both remembering something they couldn't change. Mara's voice broke the tension. "You okay?" she called from the doorway. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yeah, he's just spooked." But she could see the truth in his face. "So are you," she said softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer to Kody, slower this time, keeping his body low and his voice steady. "Listen to me, bud. You're safe. You hear that? You're safe." Kody snorted, pacing again, but slower. His breath came in sharp huffs. Ethan kept talking, tone rhythmic like a heartbeat. The same tone he'd used in the field when soldiers were bleeding and scared. It wasn't about the words, it was about presence. Minutes passed. The storm roared. Then, finally, Kody lay down still, trembling, but no longer frantic. His head lowered onto his paws, eyes fixed on Ethan's every movement. Mara stepped inside. "How did you do that, Ethan?" Exhaled, shoulders relaxing. "Same thing we did for the wounded. Stay calm until they believe you mean it." She watched the bear settle awe in her voice. "He trusts you completely." Maybe he just recognizes the look Ethan said quietly. "The one where you're trying to convince yourself you're not back there." They stayed in the barn long after the thunder eased. When the rain softened to a whisper, Mara handed Ethan a thermos of coffee. The metal was warm against his hands. "You ever talk about it?" she asked. "About what?" "Whatever happened over there." He shook his head. "Talking doesn't change it." "Maybe not," she said, "but it keeps it from owning you." He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. Later, when the storm had passed completely, he walked outside. The air was cool, washed clean. He looked toward the forest, lightning still flashing faintly on the horizon. Each strike lit the ridgeline for just a heartbeat before vanishing. That's what healing felt like, sometimes flashes of clarity and a long stretch of dark. The next morning, sunlight broke through low clouds and the smell of wet earth clung to everything. Kody was calmer but exhausted. Ethan entered the barn early, setting down a bucket of fruit and oats. "Rough night," he murmured. The bear's ears twitched at his voice. He lumbered closer, slow and deliberate, and pressed his nose against the metal bars. For the first time, Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached out, fingers brushing coarse fur through the fence. It wasn't much, just contact, but it felt like a promise. "I'm still here." Mara arrived a few minutes later and stopped when she saw them. "That's new," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess he decided I'm worth the trouble?" She grinned. "We all need someone like that." The day passed quietly. Volunteers arrived late because of fallen trees. Tom came by to fix the broken gate, nodding approvingly at Ethan's mud-covered boots. "You've been busy," he said. "Storm didn't give me a choice," Ethan replied. Tom chuckled. "That's how it goes, son. The world shakes, and we either freeze or move." "You moved." Ethan thought about that as he helped clear debris. Maybe that's what this place was teaching him, how to move again, one steady step at a time. By afternoon, the sun was out. The storm's damage was minimal, but the memories it unearthed lingered. Mara approached him near the main office. "There's something you should see," she said. She handed him a tablet showing archived footage, grainy video from years ago. A younger Kody, smaller, but still massive, trapped in a snare. Rangers are working carefully to sedate him. His cries were deep, ragged, echoing with confusion. "They said it took 3 days to free him," Mara explained. "He fought them. Every step, didn't understand they were trying to help." Ethan stared at the footage. The bear's panic looked familiar. The wide eyes, the desperate strength that came from fear, not rage. He thought pain was the same thing as danger, Ethan said quietly. "Most of us do," Mara replied. She set the tablet down. "You both survived something you couldn't explain. Maybe that's why he listens to you." That evening, Ethan found himself near Kody's pen again, watching the bear chew slowly through a branch. The sound of splintering wood was steady grounding. He spoke softly. "They tell me you fought the people who tried to save you. Guess I did the same thing. Took me years to realize that survival's not the same as living." The bear huffed, shifting closer. Ethan leaned against the fence, hands resting on the cold metal. "Maybe that's our second chance," he murmured. "To stop fighting what's already trying to help." As dusk settled, the wildlife center grew quiet. The mountains glowed blue under the fading light. A single owl hooted from somewhere in the trees. The world felt suspended just for a moment between pain remembered and peace approaching. The next day, Mara suggested something new. "Let's take Kody to the outer pen. It's bigger, more space, more light." "I think he's ready." Ethan hesitated. "You sure? Last time he panicked in open spaces?" "That was before you," she said simply. Together they opened the inner gate. Kody stepped out slowly, sniffing the air. The sky was clear, the grass still wet from the storm. He paused, muscles tense, then took another step and another. The sunlight hit his fur, and for the first time Ethan saw the full power of what recovery could look like, strong, scarred, alive. Mara whispered, "You did that." He shook his head. "No, he did that. I just didn't walk away." For the first time, Kody stood fully in the light. The torn ear, the scars, the limp, all of it part of the story, not the ending. Ethan watched him, feeling something loosen inside. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the storms. Maybe it was about finding someone who would stand beside you through them. That night, Ethan wrote again in his notebook. The storm hit hard. We both remembered things we'd buried, but he stayed. So did I. Maybe that's what matters. He closed the book, exhaled slowly, and listened to the quiet outside. No thunder now, just the steady rhythm of crickets and the far-off rustle of trees. The kind of peace you don't chase, it just finds you when you've finally stopped running. Sometimes the past doesn't vanish. It just stops shouting when it knows it's been heard. Ethan learned that healing isn't a straight climb, it's a spiral. You circle back, revisit old pain, and each time the storm feels a little less like war and a little more like weather. But peace never lasts untested. A few weeks later, the valley would face a new kind of storm. Not from the sky this time, but from the wild itself, when one act of instinct would turn everything they'd built into a race against time. Morning came with soft light spilling through the pines. The air in Flathead Valley smelled faintly of wet moss and cedar, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan didn't wake from a dream that felt like falling. The storm had passed outside and inside, but quiet didn't mean peace. It just meant the noise had learned to whisper. He drove to Mountain Haven Wildlife Center early. Mara was already there, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, feeding the smaller animals. The clink of buckets and the low hum of wildlife filled the yard. "You're early," she said without looking up. Ethan set down his thermos. "Didn't sleep long. Figured Kody might need company." Mara smiled. "He's been waiting by the gate since sunrise. Guess he knew you'd come." Inside the main enclosure, Kody stood near the fence fur, glinting in the light. His limp was still there, but softer now, his weight more balanced. When Ethan stepped close, the bear exhaled a low rumble, something between a greeting and a sigh. "Morning, partner," Ethan said. "You survived another storm." Kody blinked slowly, his breath fogging the air between them. For a long time, Ethan simply stood there watching him. Healing, he'd learned, wasn't a movie moment. It wasn't fireworks or speeches. It was repetition showing up every day, doing the small things until the noise inside your head got quiet enough to let something else grow. Mara joined him at the fence. "He's different lately," she said. "He eats more, paces less, even let one of the new volunteers clean near his water trough." Ethan nodded. "Maybe he's remembering what safety feels like." She tilted her head toward him. "So are you." He didn't answer, but the truth of it sat between them like sunlight. Over the next weeks, routine became rhythm. Every morning began the same way, Ethan cleaning the pens, Tom fixing something that didn't want to stay fixed, Mara scribbling notes on her clipboard while humming quietly to herself. Between tasks, Ethan spent time near Kody's enclosure, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. The bear responded with small gestures, an ear flick, a soft chuff, a step closer each day. Once when Mara was guiding a group of students through the rescue center, she caught sight of Ethan kneeling by the fence, tossing apples into the grass for Kody to find. The bear sniffed them out one by one, pawing through the straw, while Ethan offered quiet encouragement. "Find it, good boy," he said, his voice low and calm. It wasn't command, it was conversation. After the group left, Mara said, "You ever think of doing this as therapy work? Some programs pair veterans with animals. It's powerful stuff." Ethan looked at her. "I didn't come here to be fixed." "Who said anything about fixing?" she replied. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you you're still whole." That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day, he brought up the idea with Tom, who was cleaning tools near the supply shed. "Ever heard of those programs that link veterans and wildlife?" Ethan asked. Tom grinned. "You're looking at one. My nephew runs a ranch outside Bozeman Warriors and Wildlife. We take guys up there for a few weeks, let them work with rescued wolves and bears. You'd fit right in." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Wolves, huh?" Tom chuckled. "You already made friends with a grizzly. Wolves would be a breeze." He paused, wiping his hands. "Truth is, these animals, they don't care what you did, what medals you earned, or what you lost. They only read one thing, your energy. If you're calm, They're calm. If you're scared, they know it. Makes you really honest with yourself. Ethan thought about that. Maybe honesty was the first step toward healing the kind that doesn't require words, just presence. Over the next few days, Mara started filming small clips for the center's website. Kody walking through his enclosure, Ethan cleaning beside him, the volunteers laughing as a raccoon stole an apple. She told Ethan it helped raise awareness for wildlife rescue programs across Montana. People think grizzlies are all teeth and danger, she said. But they forget they're survivors same as us. In the evenings after the volunteers left, Ethan sometimes stayed behind with Tom to build new enrichment setups. One night, as they worked under the orange glow of a lantern, Tom said, I used to think healing was about forgetting. Then I realized it's about learning how to remember differently. Ethan nodded slowly. You ever stop missing it? The life before. Tom smiled faintly. You don't stop missing it. You just start living more than you miss. Those words lingered long after Tom went home. Days turned into weeks, and winter crept down from the mountains. Frost laced the grass in the mornings, and the valley turned quiet, except for the crunch of boots and the call of distant crows. Kody's coat thickened and his movements slowed. He spent more time resting often near the same corner of the fence where Ethan stood. Sometimes Ethan brought his notebook, reading out loud. Old letters he'd never sent to Sloane's family, to his own younger self, to no one in particular. He wasn't sure Kody understood the words, but he listened. Always listened. One evening, as snow began to fall, Mara joined him. You ever think about what happens when he's gone? She asked quietly. Ethan looked at the bear, whose breath came in slow clouds. He's not gone yet. I know, she said. But someday he will be, and you can't build your whole world around loss. He smiled faintly. Maybe not. But you can build it around gratitude for what you found first. Mara looked down, smiling. That's a rare way to see it? He shrugged. Guess he taught me. That night, as snow thickened, Ethan wrote again in his notebook. Healing isn't loud. It's in the quiet things. The scrape of a rake, the sound of breathing that isn't afraid anymore. It's in the trust between a man and an animal who both stopped expecting miracles, but found one anyway. The next morning, sunlight broke through scattering diamonds across the frost. Mara handed Ethan a stack of mail. The center had started receiving letters after she posted their story online. One envelope had no return address, just a line across the front for the soldier and the grizzly. Inside was a child's drawing, Ethan and Kody standing under a rainbow, both smiling. Below it, in shaky handwriting, the words, "Heroes come in all shapes." Ethan stared at it for a long time, then taped it to the office wall. Guess the town knows about us now, he said. Mara laughed. You're a local legend. Some folks even want to donate for a veterans workshop here, healing through wildlife. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Told you this place changes people? Ethan smiled. Maybe it changes what they believe they deserve. The center began welcoming small groups, veterans, students, families. Ethan helped guide them, explaining Kody's routines and why grizzlies like him couldn't be released. He's not dangerous, Ethan told them once. He's just learned that survival takes a different kind of strength. A woman in the group asked, And you? He paused, then said, I guess I'm learning the same thing. That afternoon, as the visitors left, Kody approached the fence, standing taller than usual. His breath clouded in the cold. Ethan reached up, resting his hand lightly against the metal. For a second, the world went still. The forest, the wind, the ache in his chest, all quiet. He realized then that this wasn't a rescue story anymore. It was a partnership. Kody had found safety, and Ethan had found purpose. They had traded fear for something steadier, trust. Healing doesn't announce itself. It's the steady rhythm of two beings learning not to run from what hurt them. Sometimes it begins the day you stop needing to be understood and start simply showing up. That night, Mara found Ethan sitting on the porch outside the center, watching snow drift across the valley. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He shook his head. Not yet. There's still work here. He still needs me. Mara smiled. Or maybe you still need him." He didn't argue. He just watched the snow fall, each flake landing softly on the wooden railing before melting away. In the distance, Kody gave a low rumble, more like a sigh than a growl. It carried across the cold air like a promise, steady alive. But peace, even the gentle kind, never lasts without testing. And soon the quiet bond between man and bear would face something far greater than memory, a test of instinct, loyalty, and the wild itself. It started with the smell of rain again. The sky over Flathead Valley had darkened by noon, the wind carrying a chill that promised another storm. But this one was different, heavier, impatient, the kind that stripped branches bare in minutes. Ethan was mending the outer fence with Tom when the first drops hit fat and cold. "Flash flood warnings up for the North Ridge," Tom said, checking his phone. "That's near Bear Creek." Ethan glanced toward the tree line. Bear Creek ran behind the sanctuary, a narrow stream most days, but when it swelled, it carved through everything in its path. "We should move the animals in the lower pens," he said. Mara jogged over, hair whipping in the wind. "Already on it. I'll take the cubs. You handle Kody and the black bear enclosure." Ethan nodded and headed for the main gate. The rain thickened fast, drumming against the tin roofs. He could smell wet pine metal and the sharp tang of mud. Water ran in rivulets down the slope, pooling near the fence posts. Kody stood near his shelter, uneasy. The wind carried the scent of change, and he sensed it before any human did. He huffed, pacing. "Easy, big guy," Ethan said, moving to the gate. "We're just staying high till it passes." Thunder cracked closer this time. The ground vibrated. Kody's head jerked up, nostrils flaring. Then came the sound, not thunder, but a deep, rushing roar. Ethan turned toward the forest. Bear Creek had broken its banks. "Mara," he shouted. "It's coming down fast." From across the yard she waved already, shepherding volunteers toward higher ground. "Get Kody inside the barn." Ethan opened the outer gate just as the first wave of muddy water surged through the ditch line. The fence shuddered. "Come on, Kody," he called. The bear hesitated, muscles tight. Lightning flashed, and with it the memory of thunder from months ago. "Kody," Ethan shouted again, voice low but firm. "It's me. You're safe. Move." Something in his tone reached the bear. Kody stepped forward slowly at first, then faster, his paws splashing through rising water. Ethan backed toward the barn, keeping his movements calm, measured. Behind them, the creek's roar grew louder. Then a crack, wood splitting. A section of the lower fence gave way, and the current tore through like a living thing. Ethan turned in time to see part of the gate post collapse, knocking loose the barrier that separated Kody's pen from the smaller enclosures. A young black bear cub, barely a year old, scrambled toward the far corner, crying out. Without thinking, Ethan ran. "Kody, stay!" he shouted, though he wasn't sure the bear understood. He waded through the knee-high water, grabbed the cub by the scruff and pulled it onto a patch of higher ground. The current tugged at his legs, cold and merciless. He was reaching for the fence when another crash sounded, the sound of something massive hitting metal. The gatepost behind him splintered. Ethan turned just as the top beam came loose. He pushed the cub aside, but the beam caught his leg, pinning it. Pain shot through him like fire. He gritted his teeth trying to lift it, but the wood was heavy water rushing faster now. The current pulled at him, dragging. "Kody." He gasped, his voice barely carrying over the noise. From across the yard, Mara's scream cut through the storm. "Ethan." He tried to call back, but another surge of water hit, knocking the breath from his lungs. Then, movement. A shape between flashes of lightning. Kody. The grizzly waded through the water, chest deep now, pushing forward with steady determination. His claws sank into the mud for traction. He reached the fallen beam and leaned his massive body against it, shifting his weight. The post creaked, then rolled just enough for Ethan to pull free. He dragged himself to the nearest rise, gasping pain shooting through his leg. Kody stayed where he was, bracing the fence as another surge of water crashed into it. Ethan shouted, "Go, Kody! Get back!" But the bear didn't move. He held his ground, the current slamming against him, his body a barrier between the flood and the smaller enclosure where the cub now cowered. For nearly a full minute, the two forces, water and bear, battled. Then, slowly, the current began to recede, diverted by debris and the incline of the land. Kody finally stepped back. Panting fur plastered to his sides. Ethan crawled toward him, soaked, bleeding, shaking from adrenaline. "You stubborn beast," he said, half laughing, half crying. "You saved us." Mara reached them moments later, mud streaked on her face, eyes wide. "You're hurt." "I'll live," Ethan said. He did most of the work. Together, they watched as Kody stood tall against the fading rain. Steam rose from his fur, and for a moment he looked like part of the storm itself, untamed, defiant, alive. By morning, the valley was quiet again. The creek had retreated, leaving behind debris and broken fences. Volunteers moved through the mud, checking enclosures. No animals lost, no people either. Local news crews showed up later that day, after someone from the town posted a photo. Ethan sitting in the mud, his leg wrapped, Kody standing behind him like a guardian. The caption read, "The soldier and the grizzly who stood against the flood." Reporters came asking questions Ethan didn't want to answer. He said little, just that everyone had done their part, but the image spoke louder than words. By evening, the story spread beyond the valley. Emails poured in, people thanking him for showing what courage looks like in quiet forms. Letters from veterans came too, men and women who said they understood what it meant to stand your ground, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. Tom found him the next morning, sitting by Kody's pen leg bandaged. "He's famous now," Tom said with a grin. "Guess that makes you his publicist." Ethan chuckled. "He doesn't need words. He already said what matters." Tom nodded. "Maybe so. But the world could use reminders that bravery doesn't always come with medals or uniforms." Mara joined them, holding a folder. "The board wants to start something new, a Veterans and Wildlife Recovery Program. We'll train volunteers to work with rescue animals. You'd lead it if you're willing." Ethan looked at her, then at Kody, who was dozing in the sun, his breathing steady. "I don't know if I'm a leader," he said. Mara smiled. "You don't have to be. You just have to keep showing up. That's what everyone here learned from you." The following weeks were filled with rebuilding fences, repaired trails, cleared plans drawn. Ethan threw himself into the work. Veterans from nearby towns started visiting, helping clean up and finding purpose in motion. One of them, a young Marine named Caleb, stood by Kody's pen and said, "Feels like looking in a mirror, doesn't it?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah. Only difference is, he already figured out how to stop fighting himself. It became something larger than rescue, a movement. Families visited on weekends, students came to learn about Montana's wildlife, and veterans found a place where silence wasn't awkward. It was understood. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Ethan stood near Bear Creek. The water glimmered gold calm now. He remembered the chaos, the weight of the beam, the roar of the flood, the moment Kody refused to run. That image stayed burned into him. Not as fear, but as proof. Proof that strength doesn't vanish with age or injury. It just changes form. He walked back toward the sanctuary, where Mara and Tom were locking up. Kody was lying near the gate, head resting on his paws, half asleep. Ethan crouched beside him and whispered, "You did good, partner." The bear blinked once, slow and content. Ethan sat there for a while, listening to the night settle in. Crickets sang from the grass. The air smelled like damp soil and pine needles. Somewhere nearby, the creek murmured the same water that had almost taken everything now, just another part of the valley's rhythm. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's staying put when something inside you says to run. Kody didn't save Ethan because he was fearless. He did it because loyalty was stronger than pain. And Ethan learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like a man and a bear standing in the rain, refusing to let go. The weeks after Bear Creek's flood brought calm again. But time, like the river, never stands still. Seasons would change. And with them, so would the quiet bond between soldier and grizzly, a bond that would soon face its final test in the slow passing of years. Winter came softly that year, like a long breath finally exhaled. The flood at Bear Creek was now just a story. People in Flathead Valley told how a soldier and a grizzly faced a storm together and changed what courage looked like. But for Ethan, it wasn't a legend. It was a memory. It lived in small things, the way Kody blinked slower when he heard thunder, or how his own heartbeat no longer raced when rain began to fall. Snow covered the sanctuary in gentle layers. The trails glowed under pale light, and every sound carried the creak of wood, the low hum of heaters, the rhythmic crunch of boots in frost. Inside Mountain Haven, Wildlife Center time slowed to the rhythm of care, feeding, cleaning, checking the fences that the storm had once torn apart. Kody moved more slowly now. His shoulders are still strong, but each step is measured, deliberate. The limp never fully healed, though Ethan had stopped seeing it as a flaw. It was just part of how Kody moved through the world, steady, purposeful, unbothered by pity. One morning, Ethan carried a bucket of apples to the enclosure. Kody met him halfway, chuffing softly. "Easy, big guy," Ethan said, tossing one across the ground. The bear caught it between his paws, cracked it open, and ate without hurry. Tom wandered up his cap, dusted with snow. "He's looking older," he said, leaning on the fence. Ethan nodded. "We all are." Tom grinned. "Difference is, he wears it better." They both laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. The new Veterans and Wildlife Recovery Program had taken root. Every few weeks, a small group of veterans arrived, their hands still restless, eyes still searching. They learned to rebuild pens, mend wire, feed foxes and owls. Mostly, they learned quietly, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Ethan didn't lecture. He just showed them what time and routine could do. Sometimes he'd lead them down the path to Kody's enclosure. The bear would lumber close, eyes half-lidded, unbothered by strangers. "He's not dangerous," Ethan would tell them. "He's just learned how to be still. That's harder than it looks." One afternoon, a young Marine named Caleb stayed behind after the others left. He stood at the fence, hands gripping the cold metal. "How long before it stops feeling like I'm still over there?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "I don't think it ever fully stops," he said finally. "You just learn to build something steady enough to hold the noise when it comes back." He nodded toward Kody. "He still wakes up when it storms, but he doesn't panic anymore. He trusts the world won't fall apart again. Maybe that's all we get." Caleb nodded, eyes distant. "That's something, though." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "It is." By spring, the valley thawed. Water from melting snow turned the air rich with earth and pine. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the trails. Life returned in small ways, birds nesting in the rafters, fox kits tumbling in the grass. Ethan's days fell into rhythm again. Morning rounds, feeding, checking fences, then sitting with Kody in the evenings while the sun bled gold through the trees. Sometimes Mara joined him, bringing coffee or fresh bread. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked one evening, watching the skies. Ethan shrugged. "This is enough." She smiled. "You said that 6 months ago." He glanced at Kody, who was resting near the fence, eyes half closed. "Guess I mean it now." But he knew life didn't hold still, no matter how much you wanted it to. The first sign came in the way Kody started sleeping longer, eating more slowly. Not sick, just old. His fur grew silver around the muzzle, and his breath came deeper, heavier. Mara noticed too. "You think he knows?" she asked. Ethan looked at the bear, whose gaze followed a drifting hawk across the sky. "Yeah," he said softly. "He knows." That spring, a local wildlife photographer came to document the sanctuary's work. She took photos of the volunteers, the foxes, and the veterans, helping rebuild the rehabilitation barn. When she reached Kody, she paused. "He's magnificent," she whispered. Ethan stood beside her. "He's a survivor." She smiled. "So are you." The photo later appeared in a regional magazine, The Grizzly and the Guardian. The story focused on resilience, how wildlife rescue programs and veteran outreach could heal more than wounds. Letters came from across the country. Soldiers, teachers, kids. Some sent drawings, others small donations. Ethan read every one. He taped the letters to the office wall until the paint disappeared beneath them. Life moved on in its quiet way. Each season wrote its own chapter. Summer storms softened, autumn leaves flared, winter returned with its slow grace. Through it all, Kody endured, slowing but still steady. Ethan walked beside him each morning along the fence line, mirroring his pace. Tom often joked, "You two look like old men walking to check the world's edge." Ethan smiled. "Maybe we are." One evening, as the first snow returned, Mara found Ethan sitting outside the barn, notebook open. "You writing again?" He nodded. "Trying to." "What about?" "About time," he said. "How it doesn't heal everything, but it gives you enough distance to breathe between the hurt." She leaned on the railing. "You always did like the quiet kind of wisdom." He smiled. "It's the only kind that sticks." Inside the enclosure, Kody stirred, sniffing the air. Ethan rose, walked over, and placed a hand against the fence. The bear leaned slightly toward it, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold. "You ready for another winter?" Ethan asked. Kody blinked, slow and steady. Ethan stayed there a long time, listening to the rhythm of the bear's breathing. It was the same rhythm that had guided him out of panic months ago, the reminder that life doesn't rush even when we do. When spring came again, it was gentler than the last. The snow melted early, and the forest floor shimmered with dew. Ethan woke one morning to find the air unusually still. No huffing from the enclosure, no sound of Kody's steps. He walked out quietly. The bear lay curled under the same tree he always favored, breath soft, steady. Still alive, but slower. Ethan knelt by the fence. "Morning, partner," he whispered. Kody's eyes opened halfway enough for recognition. Then they closed again. That day, Ethan did his rounds slower than usual. Every task felt deliberate, sacred even. The sanctuary was full of live foxes, deer owls, and cubs in the rehab pens. Yet the stillness around Kody anchored everything. In the weeks that followed, Ethan noticed the inevitable changes: longer naps, shorter walks, fewer apples eaten. Age quiet and honest had come for his friend. Tom said it gently one evening. "He's given you everything he had, son. You gave him the same." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I just wish it didn't have to end." Tom smiled sadly. "Nothing that matters ever really ends. It just changes form." That night, Ethan wrote in his notebook again. "The world keeps moving, but love remembers where it was. Healing doesn't mean you stop missing what you've lost. It means you learn to carry the memory without breaking under its weight." Seasons passed quietly. Kody's pace slowed to almost nothing, but his presence filled every space. Visitors still came, and the veterans still worked, but everyone seemed to lower their voices near his pen, as if respecting an old soldier resting between battles. Ethan spent every evening beside him now, reading out loud from his notebook, the firelight from the barn flickering across the snow. Kody would huff occasionally, as if to say he was still listening. Mara brought coffee one night and sat beside Ethan. "You ever think he'll just know it's time?" Ethan nodded. "He's always known before I did." The stars above were sharp and bright. The night air carried the kind of silence that feels alive, like the world is holding its breath. And under that silence, something gentle was shifting, a goodbye forming in the quiet between heartbeats. The next morning would bring stillness unlike any other, the kind that follows after love has finished its work. And under the oak tree where seasons had come and gone, the story of the grizzly and the soldier would find its final piece before beginning again. The morning came quietly, with a sky the color of pale ash and light snow falling through the pines. Ethan woke before dawn, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was a habit, or maybe some part of him already understood that this day would be different. The world felt still, the kind of stillness that holds its breath before a truth arrives. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. Frost glimmered on the porch railing. From the sanctuary below there was no sound, not the soft huff that usually greeted him, not the shuffle of movement from the main enclosure, just silence. He knew before he reached the gate. Kody lay beneath the old oak tree, the same spot he always chose when the sun was warm and the wind was kind. His head rested on his paws. His breath had stopped sometime in the night. Snow had begun to gather in the fur along his back. It looked peaceful, not tragic, like the forest itself was tucking him in. Ethan knelt beside him. His gloved hand brushed along the rough fur, cold now but familiar. For a moment there were no words, only a feeling too full for sound, gratitude, loss, and something deeper, like a prayer without form. "You did good, partner," he whispered. "You stayed till the end." Mara found him there an hour later. She didn't speak at first, just placed a hand on his shoulder. The air between them carried all that needed saying. When she finally did speak, her voice was soft. "He waited for you to be ready." Ethan nodded, tears sliding quietly down his face. "He taught me how." They buried Kody beneath the oak, the earth frozen but forgiving. The veterans came, so did volunteers and townsfolk who had followed the story since Bear Creek. Tom carved a small wooden marker, "Kody, my brother," in the quiet. When the work was done, no one rushed to leave. People stood in silence watching snow fall through the branches. A child placed an apple near the marker. "For when he wakes up," she said simply. Ethan smiled, though it hurt. That night, he sat by the window of his cabin looking down at the sanctuary lights. The valley glowed faintly under the moon. He opened his notebook, the one filled with years of thoughts and small notes to himself, and wrote, "He wasn't mine to keep, but for a while we carried each other home." In the days that followed, the stillness lingered. Every routine felt incomplete, no low rumble in the morning, no heavy steps along the fence line. The world seemed too large again. But something had changed inside Ethan. The quiet no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like memory doing its work, turning grief into gentleness. Mara noticed it too. "You don't seem lost," she said one evening as they closed up. "I'm not," he replied. "He left me enough to find my way." The new volunteers looked to Ethan differently now, not just as the veteran who helped run the center, but as someone who had learned what healing looked like in its truest form. He taught them that wildlife rescue wasn't about saving animals from nature. It was about helping them return to it, and sometimes helping people do the same. When spring came, the air was warmer. The snow melted early, and the forest floor bloomed with tiny purple wildflowers. Life returned quiet but insistent. One afternoon, a knock sounded at the cabin door. Mara stood there, smiling softly. In her arms was a small grizzly cub, maybe 6 months old, all fluff and uncertainty. One ear bent slightly, not torn, but imperfect enough to feel familiar. "He was found near a wildfire line up north," she said. "Too young to release. Thought maybe you'd want to meet him." Ethan blinked, speechless for a moment. The cub sniffed the air, then let out a small huff that sounded more question than fear. He knelt, extending a hand. "You've got some big paws to fill, kid," he said with a quiet smile. The cub pressed its nose against his fingers, breath warm and damp. Something inside Ethan, something that had been still for months, stirred again, not to replace what was gone, but to continue it. That night, Ethan carried the cub outside under the stars. The oak tree stood quiet against the sky, the wooden marker gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The cub wandered near it, sniffing the ground, then sat down, head tilted in that same familiar way. Ethan laughed softly through tears. "You really had to send me one like you, huh?" He sat down beside the cub, shoulders shaking from both laughter and loss. For a while, they stayed like that man-bear in memory, all part of something that didn't need explaining. In the months that followed, the sanctuary thrived. The Veterans and Wildlife Recovery Program expanded, supported by donations from across the state. Families came to learn about grizzlies, black bears, foxes, and wolves, about how survival in the wild isn't just instinct, it's connection. Ethan shared Kody's story not as a legend, but as a lesson. He wasn't a pet, he told visitors. He was a teacher. He showed me that strength isn't about fighting what hurt you, it's about trusting life again after it did. He spoke simply, never rehearsed his words, carrying that quiet conviction that only lived experience can give. Kids listened, wide-eyed, veterans nodded with knowing silence, and Mara often stood nearby, smiling. There were facts woven into every story now about the biology of grizzlies, their role in the ecosystem, the reality that most never get a second chance in captivity. But Ethan always tied it back to something human. Wildlife rescue, he'd say, isn't just about them. It's about us, remembering that every creature, even the broken ones, still has a place in the world. The cub, now named Finn, grew stronger each week. Playful, curious, stubborn. Sometimes he'd sit under the oak tree staring at the marker, as if waiting for a voice only he could hear. Ethan watched him, often smiling. The ache in his chest was still there, but it had softened, turned into something gentle like gratitude that refused to fade. On the anniversary of the flood, the town held a small gathering at Mountain Haven. Veterans, families, and volunteers came together under strings of lights. Mara read a letter aloud from a soldier stationed overseas who had heard their story. It said, "You reminded me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding someone or something that makes staying worth it." Ethan listened, his throat tight. He looked around at the people laughing, at the kids holding hot cocoa, at the cub now dozing near his feet. And for the first time in years, he realized he didn't feel like a guest in the world anymore. He belonged to it again. Later that night, after everyone left, he walked down to the oak one last time. The moon was full, the valley quiet. He placed his hand on the wooden marker. "You did your job, brother," he whispered. "You brought me back." A breeze moved through the branches, scattering a few last leaves that fell around him like blessings. He turned toward the cabin. The cub trailed behind, clumsy but determined, pausing once to glance back at the tree before catching up. Love doesn't vanish with loss. It changes shape, finds new hands to hold, new hearts to teach. The truest connections never end. They simply evolve from care to memory, from grief to gratitude, from silence to story. Ethan looked out over the sanctuary one more time. The lights glowed warm through the trees. The sounds of the wild carried through the night, distant, alive, whole. He breathed in the cold air, steady and sure. "Come on, Finn," he said softly. "Let's go home." And somewhere in that quiet, maybe in the wind or maybe in his heart, he could have sworn he heard another sound, a low, contented rumble, the kind only one bear ever made. Because some bonds, like the forest, never die. They just find a new way to keep living. If you've ever carried something heavy, grief, fear, or silence, let this story remind you that healing doesn't mean going back. It means stepping forward even when it hurts. The wild teaches us that life never stops giving second chances. Sometimes they just arrive in a form we don't expect. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to reflect on the people or creatures who've walked beside you when you needed it most. And if you believe in stories that heal, protect, and connect, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Bear Tales, where every story reminds us that love, like the wild, always finds its way home.